welcome to the Leadership Podcast. This week, it's Will, myself, and Dion, and we will be discussing the ongoing cabinet nominations for the incoming Trump administration. So we're filming this on January 19th, in the evening of January 19th. So some of the confirmation hearings have begun and are ongoing, but then there are obviously nominees that for whom their nomination hearings have not started. So our goal tonight is to talk about some of the more high profile cabinet nominations and how the hearings are going, our thoughts on the process, and how we think these nominations are reflective of the state of, as we're coming into the Trump administration. As usual, we have our panel here, myself as a progressive, Will as also as a Democrat, and then Dion as our libertarian, our in-house libertarian. Unfortunately, Brent was not able to join us tonight, but we will try to continue to have a balanced conversation about these. The goal of our podcast, for anybody who's new joining us, is for us to see where our disagreements, how they can inform your decisions. And so to just have, a discussion that shows that we don't all have to come from the same place, but hopefully we can come to some type of consensus or understanding of the different sides of these arguments. And so as we're going into the new administration, we think that this is more important than ever, because part of why, we think why there is so much polarization is because people don't really talk across the aisle to people who may disagree with them. So here we are. Hopefully you guys are listening. Hopefully you guys are return listeners. So in starting off this week, we decided to start off with the nominee that we, for the position that I would say the three of us are most familiar with, in that we're all veterans. We all served in the Air Force. That's how we met and connected with one another. So we had Hegseth's hearings this past week. He's been nominated to be Secretary of Defense. His background is that he I think he's most known for being the Fox morning host for the weekend, Fox and Friends weekend host. But he does have time also that he's a combat veteran, as well as he's led a few nonprofits since in prior to him joining Fox. So I don't know. We can start it off. I don't know. I feel like I'm going to kick it to Will to kind of start off. Were you able to catch any of the hearings or see some, read up on or on how the hearings are going, and what are your thoughts so far?
Yeah, I mean, yes, Hegseth's probably the one that the position that we're the most familiar with. And I wish Brett was able to join us today. I think we may be relying on Dion to try to make sure that we get the right-leaning conservative viewpoint on this. But I will
I'll try to put on a elephant hat for a little while.
But I will also, I mean, in this particular case, and this is something that, one of the reasons I really love these conversations is I think Hegseth's one of the most ill-equipped, unprepared secretaries of defense that we've ever seen nominated. And, I know that I'm coming from a biased place.
Well, Will, why do you say that? Why do you think he's the most ill-prepared?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, because I have my own opinions, but
yeah, I mean, look, the guy was a television Fox News, Fox and Friends host, right? And I know, okay, on the right, they would say, yeah, well, so was Trump. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's my point too. But he's never led a large organization. I think what's been coming out is like, we're talking like maybe 50 people max. And those are in nonprofits that he was forced out of due to financial mismanagement and sexual harassment allegations, which has its own issues, considering the sexual assault, sexual harassment issues that the military has. So, he's never led a large organization. Yes, there are numerous, I mean, I guess you would still call them allegations because nothing, he hasn't been convicted of anything.
That's the right way to say it, allegations.
And that's okay, but when his own mother comes out and is like, essentially like, you're a horrible human being and that's just who you are. I get that people can be good managers of organizations while being morally devoid. I just don't see that in him. I don't see him being a really good manager of the military while also being all of these other things. So yeah, I'm, and again, I recognize that I'm biased. I have no confidence in him, and I honestly believe that this is a gift to our adversaries. I don't think that him as the Secretary of Defense is helpful to us or our military at all.
I mean, I look at the fact that I both outrank him and am older than him, and I'm like, wait a second, could I do a better job than him?
That's what I was going to start with,
like,
Dion.
No, I don't think so.
That's what I was going to start with.
I mean, job than him.
Will, you are the highest ranking among us, and do you feel like, you know what, I should have been Secretary of Defense? You know what I
mean? It almost seemed like, his qualifications were that his life mirrored Donald Trump's.
Yeah.
He's a television celebrity who bankrupted organizations, who has all of these allegations against him. And I do feel like Trump's like, I can see myself in him. And I mean, obviously Hegseth, he's come out, women shouldn't be in combat. The military is too woke. So there is an argument to be made that I disagree with, but there is at least an argument to be made where people who are legitimately trying to make the country safer and whatnot can make those arguments that I think are wrong. But, I would imagine that is what Republicans would probably hang their hat on, that, well, he's going to come in and make the military less woke, and that's going to make us a more lethal fighting force. I would imagine that that's what they would have to hang their hat on, because there's not a lot to defend.
I mean, I think the thing that I struggle with, so I think that Hegseth is a good example of a larger theme with the cabinet picks, that they seem to be, the theme is that Trump seemed to choose people who he viewed to be disruptors and people who were pushed out by whatever the established norms are of either the organization in which he's chosen to appoint them, or people who just in general are on the fringe, and have the same grievances that he felt coming in as an outsider, right? So I guess the devil's advocate is, I too, like you, Will, I'm like, okay, I don't want to be biased. So it's not that he's an outsider. I'm actually okay with the idea that, he served, but didn't necessarily achieve rank, right? Because there's a lot of people, like I think of myself, right? I got out as a major. And if I had continued a career path and taken on other leadership roles, that eventually I could see myself, or someone like me getting to the point where I'd be like, oh, that person has shown leadership and gotten more leadership experience outside of the military. And the whole point of, the United States military is you want civilian leadership of our armed forces.
Right. So you might not want generals in charge.
Yeah. So I'm not. So I guess that's a long way of me saying I'm okay with the non-general model, right? I get it, because the thing with that is true is that what you find in the military is you have institutionalists. You have that in all of these departments, right? Anyone who's worked in government knows you get to the point where there's certain types of people that have been within these institutions for so long that they can't think outside of the box, right? And they serve the institution as, in this traditional sense. And anybody who says, oh, no, we need to change, those types of people tend to be a barrier for change. So from the perspective of the Republicans, I can see the idea of wanting to choose somebody who is outside of that, somebody who may be more connected to the American people, somebody who's heard and is hearing feedback that's negative about the military. It is willing to hear it and then say, okay, well, what can we change? Right. So this is lawyer Thea making the devil's advocate argument of why you would pick someone minus Hegseth's moral shortcomings, right? But the problem is I still think you can find someone like that has more experience leading large organizations. And so without even getting to the fact that his comments on when it comes to women in combat and the allegations of sexual assault, the thing to me, it's kind of coming back to what you said, Will, is his lack of experience leading large organizations. To me, that is such a big one because, like for me, and I'll use the military here because we're talking about SecDef, is I remember my commander, her husband became terminally ill, and unfortunately he passed away. And so she ended up leaving, and I was a deputy, or I ended up having to as a deputy, kind of step into this command role for a while. And I thought I knew like what leading was. And and I remember back then we had BlackBerry, so I got the BlackBerry, right, and I had to get the like late night phone calls and stuff like that. And I remember just realizing how much more was like I was responsible for than I had any concept of, having worked, up until that point. And everybody who's taken command in the military will tell you command is a lot. And I only did it temporarily. I wasn't even a full, had a full command tour. And I just think the bigger the organization, you really do need to have been a fly on the wall or have some kind of gradual stepping stone into leading organizations that are large. And I just think you just don't go from a 50 person nonprofit to, the largest employer in America. So I have other thoughts, but that's like my big one when it comes to that. And that's where I struggle with Trump and his, his judgment when it comes to who he picks and who he surrounds himself with.
So what I find myself thinking about is there will often be times when the commander in chief is unavailable for whatever reason. Um, and then in situations that involve national defense, the chain of command goes to the SecDef right before it goes to the commander in chief. And I think about like, think what you will about the commander in chief, President elect Donald Trump making certain decisions when it comes to national defense. I know everybody has their own differing opinions about that, but he was elected by a majority of the people this time around. So we get what we elected. But when you think about, okay, there are things that rise to the level of the Secretary of Defense that don't necessarily require pulling the commander in chief out of a meeting or out of whatever he's doing, right? And you kind of think about that level of decision making that has to happen oftentimes with some sense of urgency, right? Like usually national defense matters like that are middle of the night phone calls. Hey, so and so just launched an attack. This and such just happened. Whatever, right? And I think about him in those situations, and I think what will probably happen is he will not have the wisdom or experience to pull from of having to make that level of decision, right? That the enormity of that kind of decision. But I get the impression from him that he's the kind of guy that is like, well, I got this job, so I'm just gonna make a decision, right? And then we hope it's the right gut decision that he makes, right? I'm not saying that I want the old guy in there necessarily, just like you were saying, Thea. Like, it's not always the best thing to have the person who grew up through the system, because they usually are hindered by, this is the way that we've always done it, and so that's the only way they know how to do it. Even if they want to do things differently, they just they haven't exercised those muscles of thinking outside the box. But yeah, I think about And the fact that, most people don't understand in this country, if they're civilians, they don't understand that the number one decision maker to launch nukes is the president. The number two is the SecDef.
Yeah.
It's not the vice president. It's not Congress. Is right. It goes president then SecDef. So, what is he's like 43 years old, and I just think about like having that level of decision making
Well, the
placed
age,
solely
I
on
think
you.
we can't. I can't push back on the age too much because we had President Obama wasn't much older than that when he was elected president. Same thing with JFK.
Sure.
But it's the like you said, it's what is informing his decisions. What are the things that he before he thought he was going to be Secretary of Defense? That what has he communicated? What that informed his service and that informed how he saw the world, and that's where I say his moral shortcomings come into play, right? His view of the military seems to be that of a person of grievance, and it seems to be a very narrow view of our role and who we are as an entire force, as a total force. And so I'll open up with the women in combat. This idea that in order to have women in combat roles, so let's start with women have been in combat roles long before we officially, it was a headline. So number one, how are you defining combat roles, right? Women fighter pilot, Air Force, tip of the spear. You've had that for years. I remember being at the academy, and I forget the pilot's name, but there was a female pilot at A-10, and she brought her A-10 back, and it was
Another
like
chick,
full of holes.
JC.
Yeah, and I remember that was something that we were like, "Oh my God, she survived that mission," kind of thing. So and that was 20 years ago when I was a cadet, right? So, but I've always resented the idea that women, you have to lower standards, and then the question is, what are the standards and what are the purpose of those standards that you quote unquote think you have to lower in order to let women in? Because sometimes standards themselves are created to be exclusionary, and we found that in the military where we've had to question certain standards. But typically people assume it's the physical fitness standards. Okay, well, let's address that. Do you have to lower those standards? Then the issue is, well, when you bring women into these units, then it's disruptive because then you're introducing the issue of sexual assault, and that's always been the wrong answer. Like, it can't be, well, if you have women around, men are going to rape them, so don't have women around. And this week I made it a point to listen to a lot of his clips when he spoke about unit cohesion. He talked about he had this just very negative way of speaking about women, and there was never an acknowledgement of what we can bring to the fight, what women, service members, the value that we've added over the years. The just lack of acknowledgement of that. It's like it's really hard to follow someone who you think doesn't think you belong there, and we know a
this is
huge part of our fighting force.
It's all stuff that's been adjudicated over the last 20 years. Like, it's not, he's acting like this is just now happening, or like, I mean, those arguments were used for years. We have moved on. We have moved past that, It reminds
me wonder what his experiences might have been when he deployed.
Yes.
Did he have some sort of negative experience with a female troop or something? And I wonder, like, I have not heard any stories like that come out. You would think that some male or female troops that served with him on any of these deployments might have come out and said, hey, I think this is why he's saying that, because here was this thing that happened, or whatever, right? It's odd to me that we haven't heard any of that, but I did hear something interesting.
But Dion, it could just be the absence of that, right? I mean, I remember having an airman tell me that he didn't think that I should be in an authority position over him because he didn't think women should be officers. And I remember being like, I'm so glad that you've shared your opinion. That does not matter at all as far as our chain of command is concerned. Some people just have, they come into the military. That's the thing. Everybody comes into the organization with whatever their beliefs are. That's fine. You can have your beliefs, but I think coming back to what you were saying, Dion, but what informs you are those beliefs informing your command decisions. And now you're having somebody who has spent years, letting us know what he really thinks of women and the roles that we play in the organization now that he's being tasked to lead, right? And that's just like, that's the thing that to me is disqualifying beyond then his, the woke and DEI and all that, dog whistle language. But it's just really, he's been very explicit when it comes to, his views on women and our contributions.
I will bring up again.
Mm-hmm.
This is me playing devil's advocate now.
Mm-hmm.
During his hearing, now I've seen clips of his other statements, right? So I'm certainly not saying that he has never said that women should not be allowed in combat. There is footage of him saying that. During his hearing, though, what he did say in the way that he tried to clarify is they should not be allowed in combat if they got to that position because of lowered standards. So
and again, we've moved, that was adjudicated years ago,
Yeah.
So I kind of want, so I heard this on another podcast and I thought it was an interesting point that they brought up that nobody ever talks about, right? Because we all talk about, like, there are different fitness standards for men and women. We all know,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there are two things that were kind of brought up. One is that the Army, for better or worse, kind of solved that in that they have a physical fitness test, which kind of measures what is your physical fitness based on sort of the average of what a person of your gender and age would be expected to do. And then they have a combat fitness test, which is kind of like, one of the things that I remember is there was a certain weight, it was like 200 pounds or something, that you had to drag like 100 yards by like the little loop that's on the back of your body armor, right? And that is definitely something that as a combat soldier you would have to be able to do. And it didn't matter whether you were young, old, male, or female.
Yeah.
You had to pass the minimum standards of the combat fitness test. So is it perfect? No, but it goes one step further to kind of addressing, like, there is physical fitness, are you a fit human being? And then there is a combat fitness of, can you do the bare minimum of things that we think are necessary for the battlefield? So, okay, there's that. But then on this other podcast, what they brought up is we never talk about the fact that the fitness standards for an 18-year-old are totally different than the fitness standards for a 40-year-old. And all of us here can probably sit here and go, if you tested me on the physical fitness test when I was 40 against the standards that I was tested on when I was 18, we all would have failed, right?
Yeah.
But nobody talks about that. And so is he also saying that 40-year-old men, by and large, shouldn't be going into combat either because they can't pass the fitness test?
Or on the flip side, that if I am deployable as a 40-year-old, then when I was 18, I didn't need to be held to the 18-year-old standards. I could have been held to the 40-year-old standards.
And that's where I bring up what are the purpose of the standards? What are the standards we're talking about? What do they achieve, right? And the age, the discrepancies in age point out that, and maybe it's based on, and here's the thing, like I've been parts of Tiger teams for different standard and different issues in the Air Force, not for physical fitness. So I'm not going to pretend that I have expertise in that. But when you start digging into it, you do see that sometimes there is a purpose. Sometimes it's based on the roles that an 18-year-old male in a combat role is going to be doing versus a 44-year-old. Chances are, if you're 44 and you're still you're in a leadership position and you're not the one running out there doing certain things, or you're not going to be serving in the same capacity. That's fine. And I've always been open to the idea that the standards, as long as they serve their purpose, then you have to meet them, right? And I remember struggling at the academy, to get over a wall, and do all these different things when we were going through, our different training exercises. But I figured it out. And, I did feel like even then, some of the standards, some of the things that I had to do, it felt a lot harder for me to do as a woman. And I'm 5'9", right? And so at least I had the height advantage than some of my female counterparts who were 5'1", trying to jump over a huge ass wall, right? And things like that. But yeah, I'm like you, Dion. Like, I think we need to have a real talk. And Will's right. We've done this. The military's been doing this for a long time.
We've
So
struggled through it.
yeah, it feels like this appointment is bringing us backwards instead of pushing us forward as an organization, and that's where I struggle. Another fun fact: one of my classmates from the academy has been nominated to be the undersecretary of defense.
I saw that.
I didn't know him well. Obviously, I'm on. I did not. To say that I vaguely remember him. But it's just funny to me that someone, because again, I'm like, am I ready to be undersecretary of defense?
Partly to Dion's point is also that we are just older than we feel like we are. That we are old enough to do these jobs now. We just think of ourselves as still being these young kids.
I mean, Buttigieg is younger than I think all of us, Pete Buttigieg, right? And so, if we were looking at his appointment, he was the first millennial cabinet member or whatever. So, it's not the age. I have, again, my classmate his name's Matt. I don't remember how to say his last name. It's like Lomi or whatever. Alumni there's mixed, I'm sure you guys are part of alumni or, chats on Facebook from your respective colleges. So people who knew him have differing views on the appointment. I don't know if either of you served with him. I know he flew when he was still on active duty, and then seems like he was pushed out of the Space Force. I'm not sure of the details of it, and so I don't want to spread any rumors. But it's just interesting. Again, somebody
that was in the news, actually. He was pushed out for some statements that he made. Yeah.
So it's, again, you have people operating on the fringes, and that's the common theme. The thing, though, and I think this is relevant to our conversation overall about these cabinet picks, not to just focus on Hegseth, is that it makes me question, what are we accomplishing by choosing people to lead organizations that it seems like their focus isn't to better the organization, to further the mission of the organization. It seems to just disrupt it. And I don't know, I've been telling myself, I guess, if you have people who think the government isn't working, if you're coming from the perspective already that government should do less, then I guess you send in a bunch of disruptors to just blow shit up. I don't know, like just I don't, because that's all that I see when I look at these appointments.
So to help us transition to the more fully, but also Dion, to bring back, so you had talked about, your concern with Hegseth specifically being able to lead the organization that big at that age, that sort of thing. The phone call in the middle of the night. I am more concerned with the role that Esper played in stymieing some of Trump's worst impulses when Esper was SecDef. I am less concerned with Hegseth having to take a phone call in the middle of the night than I am. We know as much as anyone can know that Trump's going to use the military to try to round people up, to use the military in a domestic immigration type role. And Hegseth doesn't have the experience or the knowledge, in my opinion, to be able to push back on Trump and say, well, that's actually completely illegal. Or he may very well know that it's illegal, and his role in that position is to just do whatever Trump tells him to do without kind of the broader analysis of, is this legal? Is it right? Is it whatever? And that is what I think all of the cabinet positions, to bring us to that direction, whether it's Pam Bondi for Attorney General or Tulsi Gabbard for DNI, like they are they're meant to just be people who will do whatever Trump tells them.
Yeah, they're loyalists. They and I think that's the main test, are the people who have shown loyalty and allegiance to Trump. But that's not the oath that we take when we, that's not the oath that any of them will be taking. And that's where you're just looking like, how is this going to work? I agree with you on when Trump says, I want to use the military to do X, then zero part of me believes that Hegseth would push back. And you're right. And he doesn't even have the connections within DOD to be able to mitigate and try to at least come up with, different strategies to try to sway Trump into one direction or the other. Like because I don't think it matters, and I don't think he has the means of doing that, right? Because Trump knows that he was a Fox Friends host. He's not looking at him like, oh yeah, you came with 30 years of experience doing, leading the military. He knows the same thing. So if Hegseth's like, in my expert opinion, Trump's going to look at him like, what expert opinion, right? Like the same way we're doing it, he's going to do the same, right?
So what is the role of the cabinet, right? I mean, I don't think it's explicitly spelled out in detail anywhere, but what do we all think that the actual role of the cabinet is? Because I have heard, two differing opinions, right? One is the cabinet is there to advise the president and let the president know what are good and bad decisions so that the president has a forum to bounce decisions off of. And I've heard other people say, no, the cabinet is there to run the executive branch on behalf of the president. So if the president says we're going to go do X, then their job is to salute smartly and go do X. Now, I have my own opinions about that, but also I think like if you listen to some of the things that Trump said on the campaign trail, particularly when he was being interviewed by less than friendly media, they would ask him, well, you're promising to do all these things now. Why didn't you do them in the previous 4 years? Why didn't you get them done before? And a lot of times he would say, well, that's because I was a DC outsider. I didn't know who to appoint. And so I just appointed people that were recommended to me and they got in my way.
And they wouldn't
And
do it.
so I think going along with what you guys have already intimated is that Trump probably looked this time and said, I'm going to appoint people who will say yes when I say go.
And I think.
Go ahead, Dion.
I mean, I think I think both of what you said, the role of the cabinet, I think they're actually both true.
It's both.
In that I do believe that the cabinet members are meant to be the trusted advisors to the president. But I also believe that they are there to execute on whatever the president's directions are. But I've never believed that should be a blind execution, right? Any more than, again, like, we were all officers in the military, and we always, were taught that if an order is unlawful, it's your job to not follow it, right? And so I think that with the cabinet members, because of their proximity to the presidency, and because they are for the most part, leading very large organizations, you do need people who have the ability to operate and have their own sense of, the mission of the organization, the rule of law as it applies to their organization, the boundaries that exist, to advise the president, but also to be loyal to, the United States Constitution, against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I think with Trump, we've all said, his instincts, there are things that he did request of previous cabinet members, in particular the Secretary of Defense, that on their face were unlawful requests, and we know we have a president who doesn't respect the rule of law. So now he's seeking to surround himself with people who have indicated they too do not respect the rule of law, or that they view Trump's will to be above that, and I mean, Pam Bondi literally in her confirmation hearing had the audacity to sit there and say she'd have to review the 14th Amendment. What do you mean? Are you insane? Like, there are times where you can play like, oh, I'm a lawyer, I don't want to answer the question, but make yourself look like a fool, right? Like, short of a Supreme Court nominee saying something like that, is completely unacceptable for someone who is seeking to be the Attorney General to then act as if they are not familiar with the 14th Amendment to the Constitution and the case law that informs it. Like, it's just, that was just absolutely asinine. And that's where she lost me. I actually was trying to be, I really struggled with her. I was like, okay, I'm gonna give her the benefit of the doubt. And I was like, absolutely not.
As a Floridian, I do not, but go ahead.
Will, did you watch any of her confirmation hearing?
So I've seen parts of it, and it was very, it struck me as being very much, like Thea was saying, she would say that she's not aware of comments that were made, and you're like, what? Yes, come on. Yes, you are. She's being put, and there are a lot of conflict of interest between Pam Bondi in her role in Florida previously, and Trump University, and some of the cases that she was overseeing before. So there's a lot of conflict of interest type things, but she's being put there as a yes person, as a yes woman. That and it's not. I'm less concerned with the individual. So like Hegseth, right? Hegseth's going to do whatever Trump tells him to do. Okay, fine. That lets the order get one level lower in the hierarchy. At some point, I feel for our fellow officers that we left behind, saying like, hold on, that's not legal. And putting those people in a position to have to say no to, the president said it, the SecDef said it, and it's working its way down the chain before someone says no. And, the instance I'm thinking of from the first administration was when they wanted to move the USS McCain because, Trump wasn't going to like the fact that the McCain was seen where he was going to be speaking. And it made it all the way down to like the bridge officer had picked up the phone, and it was the White House, and they're like, you have to move your ship. And he's like, oh, okay. And the entire officer chain of command was like, yeah, okay, I guess we got to move the ship. And it worked its way back up to the 2-star before he said, no, we're not going to move the ship. They put a tarp over it so that the words McCain couldn't be seen.
The pettiness of that, but but yes.
But to put people in that position where, okay, like, who's going to fall on their sword and say no to the president and the SecDef? Who's going to be like, no, that's illegal, because the argument's going to be, well, because the president said it is legal, or he's going to use the Insurrection Act. And while January 6th was not an insurrection, the thing at the southern border is an insurrection. Therefore, like it's going to put people in some really difficult positions that they should never be in.
And I'll kind of build on that. In all fairness, to say that perhaps it's not always the role to say no, but sometimes it is important to say yes, but. And here, make sure that information is actually going up the chain of command. And again, I'm not just meaning this to apply to DOD, because the thing that's coming to mind is WMDs and the Bush administration, right? And how information did not get funneled correctly to the president. Again, I have been in organizations where there was where you had people in significant leadership roles that did not want to pass bad news up, because you had a leader who didn't like receiving bad news. So they would try to keep things at a lower level. And we all say bad news doesn't get better with time. So what ends up happening is there's a known threat or a known problem that goes unaddressed until it blows up. And then when the leader does find out about it, they have egg on their face, and it's too late to, take certain actions. And I think that when you have people like Hegseth, that their only job, or what it seems as though the thing that qualified them for the job, was to be loyal to Trump, to tell him what he wants to hear, to do what he says, then those same people are not going to be as open to providing Trump real information when things are wrong in their organization, right? And to be able to like funnel that information forward. So Tulsi Gabbard, do we trust? I mean, she's in the position that was created in response to what happened in the Bush administration when it came to intel and the failures of the intel community. Do we really trust that what she has has shown again with her public statements and the way that her judgment as she's looked at different. I'm trying to stay away from talking too much about her comments when it comes to Assad and Syria and all of that, but like just no part of me looks at this appointment pick and thinks, well, if there is bad information or if there's a dispute or if information isn't clear in the intel world, is she the leader to decipher it, to be able to lay out a clear picture of where the choke points are, where the decision points are, and advise President Trump to actually help him make an informed decision? I don't even get there with them, which is what I would want any cabinet member to do.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Tulsi Gabbard. I did want to
Mhm.
talk to her. And Will, I saw your reaction when you first mentioned her, and I find Tulsi Gabbard to be an interesting individual, and like the story behind her, kind of again as sort of a two-party outsider looking in. So here's what I know about Tulsi Gabbard, and you guys can correct me if my facts are wrong, or fill in the gaps where I might have gaps in information. But I think most everybody knows that she was a diehard Democrat for the longest time, always growing up. Came from Hawaii, which is a solid blue state, and served as Congresswoman for Hawaii for 10, 12 years, something like that.
Number of years, yeah.
Um, but what I remember her talking about, especially during this election season, was that her first falling out with the Democrat Party happened pretty early, when she was a congresswoman on the um I think House Armed Services Committee. But there was a vote for an engagement in Syria, and she said that she was against it. And she got a call from the DNC saying, "How dare you? How dare you go against Obama? How dare you do this?" And she was like, "Well, I don't think it's the right thing to do, so I'm going to vote against it." So that is one of the anecdotes that I've heard her talk about on multiple occasions. And so it is a data point that says to me, okay, well, she seems like the kind of person who's not afraid to uh, say no when she thinks that something is wrong. And then also, I've seen and read a lot of the allegations about her supposed interactions with Assad, the ties to Russia, all that kind of stuff. The thing that made me scratch my head about a lot of that stuff is that she still has
Her
a
clearance.
commission it,
And yeah,
and a clearance. Like, she still has a top secret clearance. And so a lot of that
yeah.
stuff, I'm like, okay, if there was something there, they would have revoked her clearance and or pushed her out the door from her commission. I feel like it, but maybe I'm wrong. So you guys can help me fill in the gaps if I have any.
No, I mean, especially as we compare it to the conversation we just had about Hegseth. I mean, she was a United States representative. She is a veteran. Um, and someone made the comment the other day because of Marco Rubio, right? Everyone's like, Marco Rubio is going to sail through. And the handshake deal has always been that senators always sail through. Like,
Yeah.
the people that you just got done serving with as senator are now going to confirm you. But there's something to be said for when you have served at that level as a senator, that many of those positions you're de facto qualified for. And so even Tulsi Gabbard, simply by being a US congresswoman, does to some extent put her in a different playing field than Hegseth. Even though they both, and I don't remember what rank Tulsi is,
Lieutenant
what,
Colonel. Lieutenant Colonel.
Yeah.
I'm
and
pretty
is
sure.
she
Yeah.
still in?
Yeah, I think she's
She's
still. I don't remember.
inactive.
She's like, I think in the same boat I am, that she's inactive.
Yeah.
But she's, I think her background, her most recent position was MP, if I recall. And or for
She
our
she
listeners, military
actually
police.
2021 she was a battalion commander. So
What kind of battalion?
uh I'm not terribly familiar with the Army
Probably
rank
an
structure, but
probably an
Huh.
MP
it said
battalion.
1st Battalion, 354th Regiment. So
Okay. I mean, I think what Will is hinting at is my issues with Tulsi Gabbard aren't necessarily based on her resume, because I think what we're hinting at is, again, if you were to look at other cabinets from other, even like Democratic administrations, I think you could find someone with a very similar record to her, as far as her jobs. Again, Pete Buttigieg was the mayor of a small
Buttigieg was
town.
a mayor, a small town mayor.
Yeah, of a small town, and has been the Secretary of Transportation for the last 4 years, right? So I don't want to hang. Coming into this conversation, I was very conscious of trying to check my own biases against these people as individuals and say, what is it about them that makes me uneasy? And is it just that they're Republican, or is it just that they support Trump, or is it their actual what they have shown me as far as the public who they are, and what is it about that makes me uncomfortable? With Gabbard, I think I just, and this is where I think I'm biased, I just don't agree with her and her grievance when it comes to the people who she seems to, especially Assad, that was the hill you died on, right? I'm sorry, that was just a bad hill. I'm sorry, like, you know what I mean? Like, you, from my opinion, right? I can see you disagreed with the Democratic Party. There are plenty of people who do that. Case in point, Bernie Sanders. Like, there are very prevalent progressive people who have disagreed. I mean, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is always at odds with Nancy Pelosi. It sounds like Tulsi Gabbard had a very similar relationship with Pelosi. So it's not that, but it's like, what is the thing you were fighting about, right? And then that made you leave the party, change your values, completely morph into somebody else, and now align yourself with Trump, right? Like, I just, it's just too far of a move for me. And she
well,
also seems to be someone motivated by grievance.
let me ask this. Do you think that she changed who she was and realigned herself, or do you think that the party moved further left than she was standing, and so the Overton window moved
I so I
for her? For
yeah,
her.
I wholeheartedly don't think there are within the Democratic Party there are still centrists, there are still people to the left and to the right all along the spectrum. I think that she could have remained where she was and still been in the party, um, just like other. I mean, Joe Manchin was still a Democrat. Like there's plenty of conservative Democrats. There are plenty of
But
moderate.
is
Well,
it maybe a power
and
play?
it's a power. That's what I was about to say. I find that her moves, for me, feel much more about her own personal ambition and her realization that the fight for her to be elevated within the Democratic Party was going to be a fight. She wasn't going to necessarily be given the keys to the castle. Um, and so that's why I really think, again, her and AOC are very good comparators, because we just saw AOC lose when she ran to be on the oversight, the senior ranking Democrat for the oversight committee,
Mhm.
and it was Pelosi who whipped against her in that. So you still see that dynamic existing, but I wouldn't say that Pelosi is the woke Democrat that people have ever made her out to be. And so, as far as did the party move so far to the left, I don't think so. I don't think that it was that Gabbard was so conservative always, that she was always this centrist moderate Democrat. I don't think that's true, especially coming out of Hawaii, representing a district in Hawaii. That's not, I don't find that to be accurate. But I do think her ambitions, she wasn't a rising star in the Democratic Party. When she ran for president, she was almost laughed off the stage. And I think that
But
that can
in
hurt the
her
ego.
first term, it like having been brand new elected to
Mhm.
Congress, she was appointed to, like, she was like the vice chair of the DNC. Um, and she says that she thinks that call came in because of her demographics, right? She was a woman of color. So she thinks that's,
I mean, that's
but
nice to
like
say now when
she
you're
was kind
trying
of
to
given the
court the
opportunity.
DEI. When you're trying to court the anti-woke DEI people who hate this idea of anybody getting certain jobs. She also was coming into power, or she was coming, when she was in Congress, you also had a president from Hawaii, right? And there are other reasons that she may have been trying, there may have been people who were trying to say, oh, this person, she has potential or whatever. I don't know. But
Sure.
my issue
I guess
is, yeah,
regardless of the why, like it's just unheard of that a first term congresswoman would be
yeah.
given any kind of position on the DNC, right? And
Mhm.
so I guess again, I am
I mean,
sometimes guilty of trying to see the best in people, and then
Mhm.
at other times I see the absolute worst in people, and so I try to balance
Yeah.
that out. But I'm looking at this and going, okay, she was really kind of given the keys to the kingdom like day one, right? And she could have run with that, but she didn't. Now either it's because she made a political faux pas and foot in mouth, and then decided that she couldn't recover from that, or it was because she genuinely believed, hey, this is what I believe, this is what I'm going to stick up for, and this is not compatible with who I am as a person. I don't know, but if it was solely about power, you could look at that and go, well, she had it, right? Like she had her path laid out for her, and she was given an opportunity nobody else had. She could have run with that, and she didn't. And then also, you both brought up Bernie Sanders, and then also like Joe Manchin. And I think if I was somebody in the Democrat Party looking at those two, I would be like, yeah, Bernie Sanders has been serving a long time, but how much power does he really have in the party? He's never going to be elected
Yeah.
president.
Well, I mean, I push back. Bernie Sanders, you want to now, someone who pulled the party to the left was Sanders, right? When his primary against Clinton fundamentally changed the Democratic Party, and moving forward, it has. I don't think we
But
have
we
some
again,
of the
like
big,
outsider
yeah,
looking in, we saw what
yeah,
the Democrat Party did, and it looked like the party moved against Bernie Sanders because they were like,
yeah.
nope,
Well,
this is not
but
what
I
we're
guess
doing.
when we're talking about ambition, there's a couple of things. The reason Bernie Sanders was much older and had been in Washington as was a sitting senator for much longer when he's sitting here, than Tulsi Gabbard, right? From what I have observed, it seems as though she came into Congress, with all the ambition, all the hopes, and then ran into the inertia of a slow moving body where there's seniority and loyalty and all of those things are, make or break you. And when she differed from the folks that were in leadership in her opinions, then she found herself on the outside, like, off the fast track to whatever, right? And and from there, she has now ended up leaving the party and then gone to the most extreme right of the opposition party, right? So you were a Democrat, and not only did you become a Republican, you're not a moderate Republican, you became hardcore MAGA, and you're stumping for Donald Trump, and now you're repeating talking points that appear to be contradictory to what your values were when you came into Congress. And like I said, people can change their mind. From a cabinet coming, kind of bringing the conversation though back to why is that a problem, in that you're putting her in a role where a person's judgment, because Intel, I think, more than perhaps other cabinet picks, really is your ability to synthesize information and make informed decisions, or to give informed advice in that world. And it seems to be someone whose judgment is off, right? And that
it's
and is not grounded in anything but their own ambition.
so I've been thinking about this. If Tulsi Gabbard was not nominated for DNI, but something else, would we have as big of a heartburn as we do? If she was nominated for Health and Human Services, would we care?
I would care for health and human services, but I wouldn't care for education, for the same reason that I haven't brought up McMahon, right? Like, how much damage can you do? I don't know. Maybe I'll eat these words. Last podcast, I said, "Oh, California's sunny. It's great," and then words eaten, right? Like, but I think, yeah, health and human services. I think we learned with COVID matters in a different way, and it can matter. That's the only reason I wouldn't. I still can't digest the RFK nomination for that.
So for me, it's the intel aspect that bothers me
Mm-hmm.
about the Gabbard nomination.
Mm-hmm.
It's the all the unproven things that we don't
Mm-hmm.
know, that we assume her clearance would be gone by now. Those sorts of things are what bother me about the DNI position, because there is enough out there that while we created the DNI position as a result of 9/11 to try to fix a bunch of stuff, we didn't fix a lot of stuff. There's still a lot of silos. There's still, I don't think that the DNI position has lived up to the intent behind it, perhaps. So, I don't know. But it's the intel aspect that, like, I don't know.
Well, also, I
Are you
think
saying that you don't think she should be trusted with that information? Is that what you're saying? Or okay.
Yeah, and I recognize that I don't have a whole lot to hang that opinion on. But yeah, that there's enough. It's the, where there's smoke, there's fire. That there are certain people in certain positions that you would want to be above reproach, and
I don't think so.
SecDef and DNI are pretty high up there.
Let me put on my MAGA hat since Brett is not here, and just say that. So I think that side would say there's been a lot of smoke all over that side of the aisle, and it seems to have all been a smoke screen, that when people started pulling back on these stories, there was nothing there. And they would point to things like the Steele dossier and stuff, and they would say, "Oh, it was a big nothing burger," and all that kind of stuff, right? And then they would say, "Oh, and the fact that they were completely covering up, like the Hunter Biden laptop and all that stuff." Okay, I'm going to take my MAGA hat off now.
Well, no, I mean, I think with Tulsi Gabbard, and this is why I always try to focus on what I love clips of what people say, right? So if I ever run for office or get appointed to anything, what I've said on this podcast, hopefully I haven't put my foot in my mouth too bad, right? Because I have to be held accountable to what I've said. And that's where with her, it's the inconsistencies. And again, people can change their minds, but you went from A to Z. Like it's such a big, like a wide spectrum from where she started to where she is on, and it's hard for me to say the person who made such a jump, and this is me taking her at her word that everything she says she believes, that person's judgment and insight is what you need in a job where your ability to look at information and make reasonable calls is the key. And then you're advising someone who has also indicated that they can be swayed based on emotion and things that perhaps aren't the best for, like, they say that Trump, the whole thing is, well, certain countries can butter him up, and they give him, they bring him in, and they go invest in his businesses, and they talk him up, and that he may become biased to not see threats that are there, so you already have someone who it's questionable his judgment, but the American people voted him into office, but now you have someone in a key role also, where it's kind of like Will was saying, then what happens, as things get lower and lower, you're losing the ability to have key people basically watch Trump 6. Is he really the one? Is Tulsi Gabbard the one who's going to make sure that Trump has the right information and is going to be able to sway him in any way to make good decisions? Do we believe that that's something that a role she's going to play? Is she going to work with Hegseth? The two of them, those roles are linked. What I didn't look up this week is do we have a name for CIA?
No, I haven't seen one put out there.
So this person, that's the thing. So we just had a whole discussion about how Gabbard doesn't play nice in the sandbox, but she's in a role that needs to be collaborative, right? That needs to be able to bring different organizations together and keep them on the same page, but she doesn't play nice in the sandbox. So again, why is she the right person for that role? Minus her experience. And the other piece of it that we haven't emphasized, yes, she came from Congress, but doesn't seem to have any real experience in the intel world, which is
Right.
like a very niche kind of, it's a niche organization. It does, even within these organizations, Intel operates in its own silo, its own area, separate from everyone else. So I think, the point, kind of bringing it back to center is Trump surrounding himself with the best people, or is he surrounding himself with people who won't, quote unquote, get in his way? Because it sounds like from his perspective, he is it, right? They elected me, and what I say and what I want, it's it. He's not looking for advisors. He's not looking for people who are going to be strong on their own. He's looking for people who will let him cook, and if he burns the house down, he wants them to sit there and watch the house burn. You know what I mean? And
honestly, Thea,
yeah,
I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think that's probably
yeah,
a perfect place for us to sort of tie up this discussion about the cabinet picks, because we're almost at an hour now.
okay,
But I think you're absolutely right, and Will, I think you probably agree that Trump this time around was like, you know what? I have a mandate from the people, and by God, I am going to go out there and I am going to get my agenda done, and nobody is going to stand in my way this time. Does it? I think we all have that impression.
Yeah, that's fair.
yeah,
All right.
okay,
There are so many cabinet picks that we could have talked about. We didn't really get a chance to talk about RFK Jr. We didn't really talk about Kash Patel or Linda McMahon. So,
yeah,
I mean, there's more to come. We probably will have some more of these discussions in the future as people are confirmed and everything, and they start making decisions. But given the time that we've already spent on it, it's probably time for us to talk about what's been making us happy these past 2 weeks now. We didn't record last week because unfortunately Thea was dealing with her home city burning, unfortunately.
yeah,
Thankfully, the casualties there have been extremely low. Will and I were talking about that before we started recording, that when you just look at the massive amount of area that has been affected, the fact that the death toll is only in the 20s, while tragic for those families, is still just astounding that the death
yeah.
toll is so low, given how much widespread destruction has gone through there.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with what's making me happy. You can segue. Uh, I'm happy to be here and have my home and my family intact. Um, the last podcast we recorded was literally, about 24, less than 48 hours before the fires hit. And I was like, I'm happy because it's sunny. And then by Tuesday, the winds hit. And I had clearly I wasn't watching the weather report when I talked to you guys on the podcast. I didn't know the Santa Anas were coming. I've lived in California most of my life, minus the time that I was in the military. I've never seen anything like it. The fires, I think anyone who lives in LA, um, it was a unique experience, right? I don't think I've had that type of stress and anxiety, including my time in Afghanistan, because what I realized is when I was in Afghanistan and I'm hearing lock and one in the chamber and all that kind of stuff, and I'm like, what is happening on base right now? Let me get myself safe. I didn't have my kids with me. I wasn't, my home was still somewhere else. And if something happened to me, everything else would go on. It was really scary getting those alerts. Like we would get, the evacuation warnings, then orders, and you're calling your friends, you're texting your every group chat, everyone in your community. My one thing that I'll say that's relevant to our podcast, I don't want to take up too much time on this, but I think when we talk about the left and the right, my one criticism of the right, especially in how they've responded to this crisis and trying to condition aid to, I don't know, not liking how we vote. It's this idea that people who live in big cities, especially on the coast, the quote unquote coastal elites, that we aren't regular people that care about our families, that have communities that we're a part of, that have schools and parks and churches that we love going to, that we have memories here. And so when something happens, I've not ever heard on the left people say about Florida, oh, a hurricane hit. Well, that's what they get for voting for Trump. And pretty much some of, Tupperville, I saw a lot of the clips of different prominent Republicans making comments about, where I live, where I love, that we, almost like we deserved it, or who cares, right? Like, I don't know if people know anything about Altadena. It's a working class community. It's predominantly, people of color, middle class. They're not that. Altadena is gone as we know it. Yes, the Palisades, a very affluent area, but not everybody lives in the Palisades. Is, name your celebrity, Ricky Lake or whoever, right? And I think folks have lost everything, and they're not going to get it back. And not only they lost it, their schools are gone. Imagine waking up tomorrow and your kid's school is gone, and your street and your neighborhood and your grocery store and everything. It's unimaginable. I always knew with hurricanes, I don't know, hurricanes. I remember after Katrina going down to Biloxi for training a year later, and just being flabbergasted by just the empty plots. But I don't know. There's something about seeing ashes, and I haven't driven into the zones yet. So I think the first time I find myself back over there, I live about 10 minutes away from the Palisades, or 15 minutes. It takes me about 15 minutes to get up there, which I guess sounds far by LA, but it's not. It's like 13 miles. But anyway, it's going to be hard to see it. So I'm happy. What's making me happy is that the fires seem to be over. They're lifting the evacuation orders. I am hoping that this doesn't happen again anywhere in the near future, but there's an uncertainty now. Once it's happened, we know that it's a possibility. I don't know what we do about it, but I'm just grateful to be alive. I'm grateful to have my home. I'm grateful that I'm safe. I'm praying for those who are affected. I don't think you can live in LA and not know somebody who was impacted. But I'm praying for all those who did lose a lot, and hopefully that they are supported right now, and are taking it day by day. So,
and we're glad that you're safe as well, and
yeah.
I'm sure our listeners are glad that you're safe as well, and your family. So now that makes about 50% of our podcast team here that has been affected by natural disaster recently. Maybe we do need to talk about climate change sometimes.
No, you're up next. That's what hits Virginia. You could get a hurricane.
Well, we got snow. We got pummeled by snow about a week ago. We got I think it was like 8-9 inches, which for some parts of the country doesn't sound like much, but for the mid-Atlantic, it just ground everything to a halt. The government was shut down. DC, all the schools were shut down for 2 or 3 days or so. So it was a complete mess. But Will, what's been making you happy?
Well, so no secret that I'm getting ready to run for office, and before I file, the wife and I, we're going to take our 15-year wedding anniversary trip. We're going to go to Iceland. We're going to go see the Northern Lights.
Yes.
So we're going to take about a week next week. That's why next Sunday I won't be in the country, and we're going to go kind of take that time to be together, to celebrate, and knowing that the next year and a half to 2 years is just going to be pure chaos. Might not have a chance to take a vacation for a little while. So we're going to go see the Northern Lights and come back, and then you'll probably see me file shortly thereafter.
Nice. So we are in a solar max right now. So the Northern Lights should be the most beautiful, most active that we have had in about a decade. So you're going at the right time. Have you ever been to Iceland?
So no, we haven't, and that's why we're going now and this year, is because the conditions are right to see the Northern Lights. It's been on the wife's bucket list. I saw them once they came down into Arizona. So
Yeah.
I've seen them.
It's that. So that's where I saw the Northern Lights for the first and only time so far in my life. I hope to see them again. Was outside of Reykjavik, and so my wife said there were 2 times in her life that it was the absolutely most frigid cold she's ever been in her life. The the first one was when we were out there looking at the Northern Lights, because it was like 20 below or something, and you're just out in the middle of the ice field looking up. And the second was when we went to visit the what is it called, Thingvellir. There's a uh, there is a waterfall that comes off of a glacier. And so we were there, and it was below freezing outside already, and then you get this mist
The mist.
of like freezing cold ice water like blowing in your face. And so the 2 most cold times she's ever been in her entire life were in Iceland. So just try to prepare for that. Make sure you have face coverings.
Well, and I just got done watching that show on Netflix, Vikings, and it's relatively historically accurate, and Iceland starts to play in it towards the end of the series. So, we've never been to Iceland, but like I'm kind of looking forward to it for that reason too.
There is a museum of phalluses there as well in downtown Reykjavik.
I'll see if my
We-
wife can check that out.
We have a picture of the outside of it, and then like we went in, and I can't remember how much they wanted to charge, but we were like, it's not worth paying that much to go
You
in
have to
here.
pay
But
to enter the House of Phalluses.
yeah, it's a paid museum, but
That's funny.
Okay.
So for me, what's been making me happy is right after the snowstorm hit, we had already had this planned, but I got to head down to Orlando last week to visit with my best friend and his family. And we went to Universal Studios, and I had never been. Every time I had gone to Orlando before, we always went to Disney because somebody in the family always wanted to do Disney. And I have to say, for our listeners and viewers out there, I'm sorry, come at me if you have to, but I think Universal is much better than Disney. I had just such a better time there. It was less crowded, it was far less pretentious, it wasn't as expensive. It was just like, here's some fun rides, go have a good time, and that was it. And we're not going to try to like nickel and dime you and charge you out the wazoo. So I had a blast. My son just had an absolute fabulous time. We all got wands at Ollivander's.
Nice.
We got butterbeer. We we did the whole Harry Potter thing. It was awesome. So we just had a grand old time, and we're probably going to go back because the military tickets that they give you, they're good all year long. There's like 2 blackout periods, and it's like right around Christmas, and it's 1 week in April for like spring break, and that's it. You could go every other day of the year if you want. And I was like, okay, so we got to go back then.
The same is true of the Universal Studios here with the military tickets. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And they're building. So I know out in California, they have already built the like Super Nintendo Land.
The Nintendo one, it's really cool.
That now.
Yeah, that
at
one's
the one
here.
in
That's
Orlando,
open here.
and it opens Memorial Day weekend. So my son really wants to do that because he loves Mario and Link, and so.
Is the one in California open? Have you been to it?
The Nintendo one, it's been open over a year here. Really? It was
okay.
So we went. It was not. I think it was 2022 when we went at the Nintendo. So it's been open for a while here.
Yeah.
And so cool? It's cool. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. All right. On that note, I guess we're wrapping up. We will see you guys. We won't. So Will kind of mentioned it. He'll be out of country next week. And I think Brett also had a conflict. So we're going to be taking a week off and then coming back with a vengeance in February. And we haven't decided what our topic will be, but hopefully you guys will come back. If you haven't hit like or subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts from, please do so to help us try to build our little baby podcast into something that people hopefully are listening to and enjoying. And any recommendations or comments anyone has, please leave them, because we will see them and try to incorporate them into future shows. Thank you.
Yep. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Mm-hmm.